am not Mrs. Garvey. I'm Michelle Troop, doing it in another way. I hope everyone can hear me. Mr. Marcus Garvey Jr. is the elder son of Marcus and Amy Jacques Garvey. He hails from St. Andrew, Jamaica. His academic training includes the following: bachelor's degrees in English, economics, and law from the University of London, London, England. Bachelor's degrees in mathematics and physics, as well as a master's in physics from the University of the West Indies. Further academic credentials include a master's in physics, as well as a master's in electrical engineering from City College of the City University of New York. His professional career includes teaching mathematics, physics, and electrical engineering at high schools in Jamaica, the University of the West Indies, City and Hunter Colleges of the City University of New York. And for the past several years, Mr. Garvey has worked as a professional engineer in digital and analog circuit design and the analysis and design of optical fiber transmission systems. He currently is engaged in navigational guidance systems. He is a registered professional engineer in the states of Massachusetts, New Jersey, and is a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the Optical Society of America, the American Institute of Physics. Marcus Garvey Jr. is an African nationalist who articulates the philosophy and teachings of his father, Marcus Garvey Jr., founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. Marcus Garvey Jr. was a member of the UNIA in Jamaica and is currently president of the Brooklyn division of the A.L. Crawford division of the UNIA. Mr. Garvey is a student of the history of African peoples in the homeland and in the diaspora. He has contributed to, he has been published in both his professional area of expertise, engineering, as well as several important works in the history, again, of Africans at home and here in the diaspora. Although limited with stringent demands by his career and activities at work, Marcus Garvey Jr. lectures extensively on Garveyism and articulates the message of African nationalism as propounded by Edward Blyden, Bishop Henry Turner, and his late father. I'd like you to put your hands together for the son of the prophet, Marcus Garvey.
Brothers and sisters, a special welcome to you all this evening. We are very glad to have you here on this occasion as we celebrate and commemorate the birthday of the prophet and teacher Marcus Mosiah Garvey. You are a lovely company of African people, and I'm certain wherever he is now, he's very happy to see you here remembering him. And we have to remember our heroes and our great men who have gone before and have paved the way for the work which we have to finish. And I think you will hear of that this evening. The unfinished work of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the unfinished work of Edward Wilmot Blyden, the unfinished work of Martin Luther King, the unfinished work of El Haj Malik Shabazz Malcolm X, the unfinished work of Kwame Nkrumah, the unfinished work of Sekou Touré, of Patrice Lumumba, and of the giants of the African world, who are so many. We have to remember our ancestors, our mighty ancestors, this evening. We will call their attention to you. And we are very fortunate that we have one of our great historians to bring us from the past into the present. Our organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, was formed by Marcus Garvey in 1914. He started with 13 good and true Africans in 1914. By 1919, that organization had become 1.5 million strong. And in 1923, it numbered some 8 million African people in 34 countries throughout the world. The achievement of Marcus Garvey in mobilizing the African race has never been equaled in the past or up to now. And we will wait a long time in the future before we match those figures. But that is not to say that we are not going to work to do that. For we have certain advantages that he did not have. We also have some disadvantages that he did not have. As I spoke in St. Louis yesterday, I reminded us of the problem that we face in this time as compared with our great ancestors in the 1910s and 1920s. The people who in this country created the hospitals and the colleges that have dwindled away today. Their greatness is the fact that we now have but 3 black hospitals in the United States of America when there were 40 flourishing in the times of our great ancestors of Marcus Garvey in the 1910s and the 1920s. Those of us who talk about our academic erudition and how much we have progressed with all the degrees we have not been able to dispose health care for our people. We must respect our ancestors, for they did this because they knew that the white man had no hospitals that would cater for them, so they created them for themselves, which is the basic principle of Marcus Garvey, self-reliance for African people. Ask not what any alien can do for you, but demand what you must do for yourself and for your people. We are the A.L. Crawford Memorial Division, number 404, of this great movement, which still exists in small form, but we are rebuilding. The A.L. Crawford Memorial Division is named after one of the stalwarts of Garveyism in more recent times, Mr. Arnold Crawford, a man who in his entire life dedicated himself to the work and the ideology of Marcus Garvey, which was race building and race uplift and racial empowerment. As we celebrate Marcus Garvey, we today celebrate Arnold Crawford, a giant African. This occasion is the birthday of the founder, who has been kindly treated by history. The Right Excellent Marcus Garvey is the national hero of Jamaica. The Right Excellent Marcus Garvey sits in the Hall of Heroes in Washington, D.C. as a hero of the American states. I think that is not equaled by any other black man in the Americas. We who follow his teachings dedicate ourselves to the continuation of his work and the eventual realization of his total program. It is my pleasure to bring you our program this evening, which is a multifaceted program. The first person I'm going to call on is Sister Amy Gordon, our griot and veteran, who has prepared a work for you of Marcus Garvey. Sister Amy Gordon Sister
Ladies and gentlemen, changes every day. So, pray, work, be steadfast, and be not dismayed. Then he said, nothing must kill the empire urge. As the Jew is held together by his religion, the white races by the assumption and grand vitilla a superiority, and the man gold and by the precious tired blood. So likewise we the black men must be united in one grand racial heresy. Our union must know no clime, boundary, or nationality. Like the great Church of Rome, black men the world over must practice one faith, that have confidence in themselves, with one God, one aim, one destiny. Let no religious scruple, no political imagination divide us, but let us all together under all climes and in every countries, making among ourselves a racial empire upon which the sun shall never set. Alliance to self first. Let no one inculcate you with evil doctrines to suit their own conveniences. There is no humanity beside that will start to yourself. First to thyself be true, and thou cannot be false to any man. Then he said, we are arbiters of our own destiny. God and nature first made us what we are, and then, out of our own creative genius, we made ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law. Let the sky and God be our limit, and eternity our measurement. There is no heights, no heights, no heights to which we cannot climb by using the active intelligence of our own mind. Our minds create, and as much as we desire, we can have through the creation of our own minds. Then he said, being at present this identical weaker race, you must treat others only as they treat you. But in your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher development of science to your children, and be sure to develop a race of science, par excellent. For in science and religion lies our only hope to withstand the evil designs of modern materialism. He said, never forget your God. Remember, we live, work, and pray for the establishing of a great and binding racial heresy, the founding of a racial empire, whose only natural, spiritual, and political limits shall be God and Africa, at home and abroad. I thank you.
Disarray, in a state where we appear to be going backwards rather than forwards. In fact, if you look at the things that afflict us today, the continuing famine in Africa, the civil wars in Africa, the disease that is spreading throughout Africa and wiping out so many of our people, if we look at the atrocities that are being committed by the Aryan peoples, thank you, we have a microphone now. Is it working? Or can you hear me? Loud and clear? Good. Well, I'll just bring it over and add a little more power, although you know I have enough power without the mic, but thank you, Professor P. We are at a climacteric time in our history. Either we are going to pull ourselves together and regroup, or we will become, in the 21st century, an extinct species. This is a very serious time. In the world today, every one of the major races is comparatively heavily armed as compared to us. The European peoples in 1945 in America and in 1949 in the Soviet Union developed atomic weapons. The People's Republic of China, home of well over 1 billion people, in 1964 developed an atomic weapon of their own. 15 years after Comrade Mao Zedong and his three great associates, Lao Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, and Chu Tai, had seized power in China. 15 years from seizing power, and they had atomic weapons. In 1974, quietly, without great fanfare, the great Republic of India, the land of the brown man, the Hindu, developed their atomic weapon. Since that time, the Jews in Israel and others nations are close to that, including North Korea. We as African people everywhere in the world we look are completely without weaponry. I'm not talking even now about atomic weapons. We cannot even make the basic weapons for our defense. That would be needed for our defense. Ships, battleships, aeroplanes, heavy artillery and missiles, land-based missiles. Nothing. In fact, I'm not too certain that we even make a very useful machine gun or multiple weapons launcher. In the history of the world, at every time that we have had a state of weakness among a people, a strong people have moved in to fill that vacuum and have eliminated that weak race. The great evidence in front of us here is this land where we are now sitting down. This place, Brooklyn, was once populated by a people called the Red Man. We can't even invite him to partake of our celebration. We can't find him very much. He's on the reservations. And that is what can happen to us in Africa and here too. And don't let you tell me it can't happen here, as some African brothers have said to me. I mean African American brothers. Because if it happened to the Jews in Germany, if it happened to the Armenians in Turkey, if it is happening right now to the Croats and others in former Yugoslavia, you better believe it can happen here. For I see no white man in this country who has that much love for you, who would hold back his brother when he decides to draw the sword. We can believe that we are safe. Because the Jews in Germany said it could not happen in the land of Hegel. It could not happen in the land of Kant. It couldn't happen in a land where there were so many cultured people. But it did happen in that land of cultured people. It did happen in the land of Hegel, in the land of Kant. For there was a man called Adolf Hitler. Recently, many of us were wondering what was going to happen because a David Duke appeared. But remember, there were people who appeared before Adolf Hitler who said similar things to him. But he did come. And remember, wherever there is weakness, strength moves in to take advantage of that. It is for that reason why the things that are going to be said this evening by Professor Clarke, some of the things that I have said, should be listened to very carefully. We welcome you here, and we're glad to have you. But what we want you to do is to leave here with a clear message and understanding of the things that we have to do to turn it around, so that you can go out and say to other people, we do have a problem and there's a way to turn it around. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to ask the sisters to come forward now, and we do a special song for Marcus Garvey.
We're about to sing is dedicated to the Honorable Marcus Garvey. We will not forget you. Marcus Garvey. We are your army and your standard bearers. If you need a soldier, here am I, send me. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. In our hearts we hold thee. In our hearts we fold thee. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. You will be remembered through eternity. Be not discouraged, ever pressing onward. We are always thinking of your sacrifice. Though some may fail you and your heart is saddened, you shall always lead us to our African home. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. In our minds we hold thee. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. You will be remembered through eternity. Though you have left us, we will not forget you. For your marching to our motherland. Let not thy death make you weak and weary. You shall always triumph and our leader be. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. In our minds we hold thee. In our hearts we fold thee. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. You will be remembered through eternity. And when the battle for the right is ended, we shall march and sing the song of liberty. Wearing the red, the black and green forever, Ethiopia's anthem ringing in the trees. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. In our minds we hold thee. In our hearts we fold thee. We will not forget thee nor leave thee. You will be remembered through eternity. Thank you.
Musicians, actors, and singers who have been performing and teaching their talents throughout the United States and abroad for the last 25 years. They present an educational, cultural expression of authentic dances from the continent of Africa and the Caribbean, as well as dances traditional to people of African descent in the United States. For example, tap dancing, jazz, and the Lindy Hop. We are very glad to be able to present this birthday celebration, this highly informative cultural presentation, which opens the eye of our people, which is consciousness-raising and a mind-expanding experience. I now ask Africa in Motion Dance Theater to thrill us this evening.
The second dance is called Manjani, which is a celebration dance. We hope you enjoy our show.
Lynch your father, love your enemy. First, the dilapidated schools, love your enemy. Love, 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 love for everybody else. But when will we love ourselves?
will help. Let's sing it. Peace is there. Let's bring it. The past is gone. Don't root it. Our work is here. Let's do it. Our world is wrong. Let's right it. The battle is hard. Let's fight it. The road is rough. Let's clear it. The future is ours. Don't fear it. It's faith asleep. Let's wake it. Today is ours. Let's take it.
I know you're ready. I'm ready too. Professor John Henrik Clarke is a unique resource and a special institution in the African world. Beginning with his early years, Professor Clarke studied the world history of African people and became a master teacher. Presently, he is a distinguished Professor Emeritus of African World History in the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College in New York City. He is the editor of 21 books and has written several books, short stories, and pamphlets on African and African American history. He has written many forewords and introductions to books, the latest one being the foreword to Sheikh Anta Diop's last furnished work, that great masterpiece, Civilization or Barbarism. Professor Clarke is a well-known lecturer and has delivered lectures at major conferences in the United States and abroad. His best-known works are Africans at the Crossroads, Notes for an African World Revolution, Marcus Garvey, The Vision of Africa, New Dimensions in African World History, Malcolm X, The Man and His Times. There are so many other works of his that we could talk about. But Professor Clarke has remained, despite his great erudition and knowledge, or rather because of it, and that is the thing, true erudition and knowledge does not move one away from one's people, but brings them closer to one's people. No one has so articulated what we require as a race and a people to step forward to our future. No one better understands the work and ideology of Marcus Garvey, whom he has researched for so long. It is my great pleasure to introduce my personal friend, the friend of my late mother, the great scholar and teacher, Professor John Henrik Clarke. Right?
Thank you very much. We've got a lot of explaining to do this evening because a whole lot of things, national and international, has gone wrong because we have remembered Marcus Garvey the wrong way when we remembered him at all. Too many people have made the wrong use of his message, and too many people have missed the message altogether. I'd like to talk about remembering Marcus Garvey the right way. And I would like to emphasize, because we missed his message and the message he got from others incorporated into his message, all African nations are in cultural and economic disarray. Because we missed his message of self-reliance and nation management, there is not an African-run nation, no place in all the world. Every nation in Africa is an imitation European state. Every nation in the Caribbean is an imitation European state. And the irony here is that the concept of pan-Africanism, African consciousness, the African reclamation of the state, the philosophical and the political concept came mainly from Caribbean intellects that Caribbean people drove into exile and didn't listen to then and won't listen to now. You have not heard H. Sylvester Williams' summies calling together the Pan-African Congress of 1900. You have not heard the later day theoretician George Padmore and C.L.R. James, because we have not heard the message and the fullness of that message. We are in disarray and we are confused about color. Because we have not understood the nature of unity, and to unify all these fragments into one, an African people committed to the liberation of Africa. Because we have not overcome the color and the economic stratification put down by our slave masters and colonial masters, Jamaica has been deprived of becoming one of the great island nations of the world. But they tied up so much of their energy arguing over color gradation, economic positions, talking about their English grandfather and their Dutch uncle. They couldn't do the nationalist business of Jamaica. A story is told about Marcus Garvey leaving Jamaica for England. And the reporters gathered around him wishing for a last message before he departed. And finally, after they had gotten on his nerves to the point he wanted to dismiss them, he decided to give them an interview. All right, come on. Get your pencils ready. I'm going, so I'm leaving for England. And when they were all silent, he said, Jamaica is a ridiculous country. Goodbye. He understood then years before independence that the Jamaican mind, mortgaged to the corrupt British mind, had betrayed itself and destroyed its own ability to come into being as the role model for what a great African nation could be away from home, because they decided not to be an African nation. Now, because I am sufficiently angry, and because I have been a pan-Africanist and an African nationalist all my life, one way or the other, why must I start with beating up on Jamaica, who is not much more ridiculous than the other islands? I start here because it was his home, and it was the one place in the Caribbean where a great nation away from home could have been brought into being. It has a long revolutionary heritage, longer than Haiti. And they fought harder in their slave revolts than the Haitians, who became independent. And they fought harder and did not become independent, because the very people who you mortgage your integrity to, the English, aping him, stratified Jamaica to the point where after each great slave revolt, they would dissipate the energy of the people to the point where at the next slave revolt, you had to mount the incentive all over again. When in Haiti, the whole revolutionary period that brought independence happened over a 20-year period. And each time they knocked down one leader, another was right there. Toussaint gone, Desi Lane there. Desi Lane gone, Christophe there. And because in the difference of opinion between colors, a French general had taught the mulattoes a lesson they couldn't forget. When some of them decided that they would fight with the French against the blacks, a French general, Rochambeau, told the wives of these mulatto generals, I have a present for you. You go into the room and stand by this box. And they stood by the boxes. He said, now open the box. Now what was in the box? The head of their husbands. Taught them a lesson that I hate you almost white niggers as worse as I hate the blackest of the blacks. And once you get this through your skull, you wouldn't split yourself up along color gradations, but you will know that the enemy hates all of us, including those who are his children. Until you identify your enemy, you cannot utilize your friends. Now, why am I going off on this kick? Because when I look at Africa and the imitation European states in Africa, these African nations miss the point, every single one of them, not one exception. They created nation states. Africa is accustomed to the territorial state, a multiplicity of states interdependent, coexisting side by side. But once they created the imitation European state, they imitated something that the European could come back and destroy economically or control economically. Because we did not understand the nature of the African Orthodox Church that Marcus Garvey helped to bring into being, we are so hypnotized by the white Jesus, we will not fight our white enemy, and we will not even fight a white policeman fully, because he is the same color as the white Jesus. And you think by killing him, you're killing a relative of God. He has fastened your mind with this garbage to the point of making you forget that any people who worship a God that was assigned to them by another people is enslaved to the people who gave them that assignment. Now, in the light of this, will you look back at Marcus Garvey's dream and plan for an African Orthodox church? He didn't say leave Christianity. He didn't say leave the church. He said look at it your way. Look at it through your eyesight. Look at it through your image. Look at it through your culture. Ask some serious questions. You tell me God is merciful, God is kind. Why all the white angels? You mean not a little brown angel, a little black angel sneaked into heaven? If he's merciful and kind, isn't he kind enough to let one of us in? Because you're so fascinated with whiteness, and a picture painted by Michelangelo, you dare not ask the question. My main point here is that the missing of the Marcus Garvey message is now international in the African world, and the basic cause of most of our problems. We have not looked at ourselves as the embodiment of God. We have not looked at our children as the embodiment of the future if we're going to have a future. Ghana, it took its impetus at Kwame Nkrumah's admission from the message of Marcus Garvey, creating a Black Star Line, creating a Black Star Square. Now when Marcus Garvey said, where are your men of affairs, where are your sea captains? And Nkrumah, and he couldn't get an answer, and Nkrumah, with knowledge of Marcus Garvey, decided to answer the question, and he did. He put the sea captains out there. He reactivated the concept of a Black Star Line. The message of Marcus Garvey was getting across in one African country. Now will you understand why British imperialism and American imperialism and French intelligence in the combined colonial world had to bring their intelligence systems together to destroy this nation above all the other nations in Africa? Because it was a role model of what a nation in Africa needed to be, and it had taken its impetus from Garveyism. Now it is the nation of Jesus freaks. White Jesus, of course. The dream of Nkrumah is now being redreamed but can it be brought back into being? Because all Europe flourishes mainly when they have large areas of people outside of Europe that they can exploit or get goods and services for practically nothing. Now that Europe has bankrupted itself in an argument among themselves, they need areas in the world for exploitation to recap their economic fortune. And Africa happened to be their next target. Once they've exhausted themselves fighting among themselves. Now what is happening in Europe is tribal warfare at its absolute worst. But you won't look at it as tribal warfare when the European is involved. But you think he's above tribal warfare when he invented it. And you had no tribal war until he came and put one against the other in order to conquer both. And he's still successful. When you think you can't run a nation without his politics, you can't have a religion without his image of God, you can't make your own automobiles, you can't make the shoes you wear, you can't even make a safety pin to hold your child's diaper together. You are telling him that I can't manage without him. You're making him God again and neglecting yourself and the God within yourself. I have looked at the present in order to look at the past. I think once we understand what I'm trying to get across, the change of mentality, you might understand the tragedy of the case at St. John's. When these degenerate white boys misused a Caribbean girl, and there wasn't one strong Caribbean committee protesting it. And she herself was weak because she still had affection for them but didn't think they would treat her this way. She was mixed up and sick. She did not understand that in their mind, that's the way you're supposed to be treated. But you had the illusion that they could do no right, had the illusion they're doing you a favor by associating with you. So long as you make an endearment out of associating with a degenerate, you will not find your best self. Now, soon after the case, there was an annual charade called a parade on Eastern Parkway. And you dissipated enough energy to build 3 nations. I'm not against the parade. I'm against gyrations without purpose. I'm against ceremony without substance. Everything in your life must move you toward ultimate true independence and self-reliance, or it must be thrown out of your life. I have started with the present in order to go to the past, Because so far as I am concerned as a teacher, all history is a current event. Everything that ever happened continues to happen and will continue until you're creative enough to stop it. The misery that was visited upon you will continue to be visited upon you until you stop it. What I'm calling on you to think about, when I go back and examine the period beginning with the birth of Marcus Garvey, and this is why we need to begin that examination, is that everything interacts with everything, and there is no insignificance because everything affects everything. Now let us go back and place Marcus Garvey in context with history. Let's look at 1887. What was happening in the African world the year of his birth? What made Marcus Garvey so special, being a Jamaican and black in a color-conscious island that penalized you for being black? How did he avoid this? What was his special kind of attitude that not made him override it, but condemn it? No, but condemn it. Let's look at 1887 all over the African world. I'm trying to say that he was born into an atmosphere of struggle and revolution on the part of African people. When he was born, the Africans had already had a 100-year fight against colonialism, because once slavery was converted into colonialism, the Africans understood that this was another form of slavery. When he was born, a number of years after the British emancipation in the Caribbean, one of the greatest fakeries ever preyed on the Caribbean mind, the assumption that it was an emancipation, which indeed it was not. And when you boast that emancipation of the slaves in the Caribbean came 30 years before it came in black America, in as much as it was a fake in the Caribbean, it was a fake in black America, you said that our fakery came 30 years before your fakery. Because you ain't free yet. In any nation that would elect a Boston con man named Seaga as its prime minister is a long ways from freedom. Mentally, a whole lot of people on that island are still enslaved. Now, what am I trying to say? In dealing with this phenomenon of Marcus Garvey being born after a heritage of over 100 years of revolution in Africa had already occurred in the colonial wars that had started in the latter part of the 17th century. It extended throughout the whole of the 18th century. What then had happened in the Caribbean islands? The consistent slave revolts put a tax on the energy and disrupted the normal flow of commerce to the point where slavery became unwieldy, no longer a profitable enterprise. And if you think the British freed you 30 years before because they love you and because they were benevolent, you are misreading history And there may not have been water you was drinking this morning. You have to be out of your mind. The British, who are the master thugs of the universe, they are murderers who get away with murder because they have a style. They will not cut your throat with a dirty knife because this is out of style. That's poor form. That's poor etiquette. But they'll cut your throat, but not with a dirty knife. This crude white man in America will cut it any kind of way. He ain't got no style. The British would take you out of jail and make you prime minister and control you. That's style. That's procedure. In America, they take you out of jail and lynch you a block away if they can find a tree. That's a crude, ill-mannered barbarian who has no style. But they both relatives. Now, at the end of this century, during the period of the birth of Marcus Garvey, there had been successful slave revolts throughout the Caribbean islands, successful slave revolts in South America, especially Brazil, slave revolts to the point where they understood that they could not hold the slaves any longer. So they ran a deal on the slaves. They said, okay, you can be free. But now, being free, you got to furnish your own clothes, you got to furnish your own house, you got to go back and work on the same plantation for a pittance and support your children. So the emancipation they gave you was a new form of slavery. So don't start boasting and don't start apologizing. Understand thugs in history and that you were ruled by a bunch of thugs, just happen to have a style, and I was ruled by a bunch of thugs with no style. Europe dumped its human garbage can into the Western world. The worst of that garbage can, the worst of that garbage can was dumped into the United States. I have no problem in conceding that the white oppressor in America is the lowest, the stupidest, the most vicious of all of the oppressors ever sent out of Europe. I have no fascination for the fact that some members of my family are almost white, or white wannabes. I remember my great aunt Liza, who had a son by forced liaison with a white man. And when we got in difficulties in Alabama, we were sharecroppers, landless peasants, she would call on this son. Fortunately for him, he came out looking almost identical to his father and passed for white. And the day she called on him with another black man shoving his buggy, and he came in to take care of what needed to be taken care of, and his mother, my aunt, fixed them breakfast. She did not even sit down to eat with the son of a bitch. Her blood, and yet so arrogant, he wouldn't sit down and eat with his own black mother. So don't be preaching me no damn problem about it. Question about interracial harmony. Maybe they're just like us. Maybe you too harsh on white folks. My me this. And I had to tell her, these are the same people that brought us stacked like sardines on the slave ship. These are the same descendants. And this is what Marcus Garvey was trying to remind you. And this is what Malcolm X was trying to remind you. This is what David Walker in his appeal was trying to remind you of. I'm saying that you cannot look at Marcus Garvey out of context with the black radicals and freedom fighters of the 19th century in Africa, in the Caribbean islands, and in the United States. And when you see him when you see him as you need to see him correctly in the light of history, you would have to also concede that over 100 years of slave revolts had occurred in America before he was born, and that a 50-year struggle had occurred before his arrival in the United States. And he arrived into an atmosphere conducive to social change. And why he succeeded in America and would still fail in Jamaica has nothing to do with who was more brilliant than the other. Why the slave revolts in the Caribbean islands were more successful than the slave revolts in the United States, that were nearly all failures, had nothing to do with which people were braver than the other. The slave master in the Caribbean islands in South America bought in large lots and left the lots together, therefore leaving a cultural continuity and leaving a loyalty system. In the United States, they broke up. They bought in small lots and broke those up often. So almost immediately they killed our kinship system and our loyalty system. And the black American became the greatest sufferer of all the Africans outside of Africa, and to some extent he still is. Not understood by the Caribbeans who look at him too hurriedly, and not understood by the Africans who look at him too hurriedly, out of context with the forces of history. All of us were victims of the same tragic event in history with variations. And if you can't pass a taxi cab test downtown, I don't hear no damn lie about where you from when there's a struggle for black people. Get in the damn struggle or get the hell out of the way. Closing years of that 19th century, 1887. Now look at 1895. The Booker T. Washington Atlanta Cotton Expedition speech. When Booker T. Washington ran one of the most unique con games in history, a lot because of Atlanta Compromise. Booker was conning the black folks, the white folks, the southerners, the northerners. And white people opening their pocketbooks and weeping, shaking their head. Oh. Booker had them going when he reminded them, we are the ones who nursed your children, nursed your sick, fixed your bread. And then the clincher, with tear-driven eyes, we followed you to the grave. White folk got out the pocketbook, started giving Booker some money. And when he said that we could be as divided as the fingers, and together as the hand, and all things that make for social progress, they assumed he had endorsed segregation, gave him some more money. He told the black, you stay in the South. cast down your buckets where you are. It's better to make $1 a day than to sit next to a white person in an opera. Why, oh, good God, that's the Negro I want. Give him some more money. He became virtually the dictator of black America. Well, white people filtered everything through him. And if you wanted a streetcar conductor job in Cincinnati, the white folks wanted to know if it was all right with Booker. And if it wasn't all right with Booker, you didn't get the job. But whites were clearing everything through Booker. Now, you think Booker T. Washington was an Uncle Tom, you're dead wrong. He was a strategist whose strategies sometimes didn't work. You can blame him for scratching his head and doing his little dance and getting all that money, but if he didn't do it, Tuskegee wouldn't be there. And a whole lot of other black schools wouldn't be there either. He understood the nature of his position, and yeah, he never took a stand against lynching, never did stand against Jim Crow. When all the black soldiers were killed at the Brownsville raid in 1906, he didn't take a stand, not to Du Bois. They asked for clemency. That means they are guilty but show a little mercy. And they weren't guilty at all. But your white soldiers blackened up their face and shot up the town and blamed them for it. But I'm saying that between the years of the Atlanta Cotton Expedition speech and his death in 1915, Booker T. Washington created a school and a concept of self-reliance over and above anything that has been done since. It was this concept of self-reliance that is the epitome of nation building that attracted Marcus Garvey to the Booker T. Washington School of Thought. He was going to come to the United States in 1915, did not accumulate the means. He came in 1916, 1 year after Booker T. Washington was dead. When Booker T. Washington found that a bunch of handkerchief heads had taken over Tuskegee that didn't want to have anything to do with blackness, he knew that he couldn't get along with the people Booker T. Washington had left behind. But look at his training before he arrived in America. A master printer, technician, had called a strike in Jamaica of all places. You'd have to be out of your mind. In the early part of the century, to dare strike, nobody got a job. Everybody glad to get any kind of job. And he's calling a strike, organizing printers. Now look at the apprenticeship of Marcus Garvey for nation structure. Look at African fundamentalism taking shape inside of his mind. Everywhere he went in his journey through Central America, he found employment. Why could this man find employment so easily when other blacks were out of jobs? He had skills. He had printing skills. He had editorial skills. He had job management skills. He had nation management skills. Coming from a color-conscious Jamaica, but a master craftsman, he did not have to shirk and apologize in a color-stratified society, but could walk proudly with his blackness at a time others were apologizing for it. Now, he had an asset that others still do not have throughout the whole of Jamaica. He said, if God and my mother made me what I am, looking like I am, then I will not complain about their creation, else I offend God and my mother and my father. He has learned a lesson that most of you still have not learned. That to complain about your hair, you are saying God, your mother, and your father didn't know what they were doing. That nature was a fool. Nature endowed you with the kind of complexion and the kind of hair that protects you while nature puts you down. And it is good because it protects you while nature puts you down. When nature gave you that beautiful black skin in that sun of Africa, nature, I use the word nature and God mean one and the same, knew what it was doing. It gave you that coarse protective hair. That's good because that protects you while nature puts you down. Now let's look at the years between the Booker T. Washington speech in 1915. Marcus Garvey had gone to England. He had tried to establish the UNIA in Jamaica. Moderate success, but nothing exceptional. He had actually met Du Bois in Jamaica. I don't know why everybody forget this. And Du Bois was favorable to him and his ideas. The assumption that Du Bois was the moral enemy of Marcus Garvey is not only incorrect, but it goes against the trend of history. Du Bois was a personality, and I'll explain this shortly, and I'll explain it mainly because it's out of focus. Du Bois, taken with Western education, with the concept of the talented 10, envied the fact that Marcus Garvey, with no college education, had brought off something all of the college-educated people had failed to do. A great mass movement. Du Bois, envious of this achievement, would raise some questions about whether a non-college man could bring off a movement of this significance. Du Bois, trapped with his Western education, as most Africans, Caribbeans, and Black Americans are today, assumed that without it, you could not even function. I questioned this early in my life because I was a grammar school dropout, not a high school dropout, a grammar school dropout. And I trained more than a generation of PhDs. Couldn't go to the college, I did go to the library. I did get books. All right, now let's deal with his arrival in the United States to raise funds with the hope that he might go back to Jamaica and build a school similar to Tuskegee. 1916, his career was moving into focus. He had been introduced to the first large audience in Harlem by Hubert Harrison, one of the finest minds ever to come out of the Caribbean area, who had written his book, When Africa Awakens, still worth reading. After this, he would make a tour of the United States. 1917, black soldiers returning from World War I, some of them lynched in their uniform, some of them seeing their own children burned before their eyes. Then the St. Louis riot, the East St. Louis riot, Then in Chicago riot, Marcus Garvey now in Chicago, he sees a place for his message to get across. He said, they don't want you here. Not only let's get out of here and go back to Africa, let's get our own ships. When you're hounded on all sides, when you're drowning, you don't question a man who throws you a rope. When you're starving, you don't question anybody who gives you a piece of bread. Now we see the black American gravitation toward Marcus Garvey over and above anything it ever was in the Caribbean islands or ever will be. And it has nothing to do with any people being better than the other. You were trained by one set of slave masters, we were trained by another set of slave masters. Except for some slave buyer pointing his hand and say, I'll take that one instead of that one. I'll take this woman, I think she'd be a good bedwench. I'll take that one, I think he'd be a good stud. I'll take that one. And the rest of them you can leave on the boat and take them to the United States. So they took some to an island called Jamaica. They became Jamaicans. They took some to an island called Barbados, and they became Barbadians. The slave ship brought no Jamaicans, brought no Barbadians, brought no Trinidadians, brought no high yellows, no low yellows. Brought no people confused about their color. No people boasting about they got the blood of their slave master in their vein, their Scottish uncle and the British grandfather. No people like that. They had to become what oppression made them become. And we in the United States, under a cruder oppressor, had to become what oppression made us become. When Marcus Garvey rallied blacks after the riots, the Red Summer of 1919, the Chicago riots, we were ready to listen to him over and above any African people in the world because we had suffered a tragic uniqueness and we needed his message more than any other people in the world. And we need it now more than any other African people in the whole world. He would build rapidly, better than it has ever been done before, one of the largest mass organizations ever built among blacks before or since. His message would gravitate to Africa, to the other Caribbean islands. There would be branches of the Garvey movement in Cuba, throughout Panama, throughout all this area. In Panama, 4,000 Jamaicans had died building the Panama Canal. 5,000 Caribbean people died, all total. Now you see the irony of an American general of Caribbean descent taking over the canal and grinning. He should have said, I claim the canal in the name of the blood of my people. They dug the damn ditch. It belongs to them. But he was happy to be an American stooge and do what he was told and grin before the camera. Now we see 1920 in the conference at Madison Square, Old Madison Square Garden. The movement is well in its way, on its way. It has already reached Africa. Some of the African chiefs, anticipating the return of their brothers, had planted special crops to make sure they have enough food when we got back home. The message had gotten to Africa more than it had gotten to any part of the Caribbean islands. The message had gravitated and developed among black Americans principally for the reason we were so oppressed. We were the most wounded, the most ego-starved, the most put upon of all the African people in the world, and the least protected. We were ready for a Marcus Garvey. We were mentally ready. And when he asked for money for the ships, we had not discovered checks and money orders. We put the money in envelopes and sent it to Mr. Garvey. A great deal of the money was stolen right there in the office. Garvey was guilty of absolutely nothing. This is why I'm not too happy with people who ask that Marcus Garvey be given a pardon, because he wasn't guilty of anything. But people around him were guilty. There was a lot of thieves around him. Now the trouble has started. The force is moving against him, and he would end up in federal prison in Atlanta. But there's something before that. He flourished in Harlem during the period of the so-called Harlem Renaissance. He gave that movement a political meaning and a definition. One of his boldly declared followers was the father of A. Clayton Powell, who wrote books and said so. Now, having entrenched himself in the United States, the movement began to have difficulties within itself. It had outgrown its framework, and the atmosphere of fragmentation was setting in, especially after his absence. There are some assumptions about Marcus Garvey that was never true. People are going to explain Marcus Garvey brought a program to black America and they betrayed him. This is a lie, because they wasn't even involved. The 7 or 8 black intellects who signed a letter asking for the deportation of Marcus Garvey was unknown among black America then, unknown among them now. So you cannot say black America paid any attention to them, because they didn't even know them. Still don't know them. And if you fall for the nonsense that he came and found black America with a wishbone and gave them a backbone, you're still telling a lie, because that means you don't understand the nature of the struggle before his arrival. Martin Delany was just as firm on being back to Africa as Marcus Garvey. Bishop Turner was just as firm on going back to Africa as Marcus Garvey. The Chief Sam movement developed before Marcus Garvey. We have not studied the pan-African, back to Africa movements before Marcus Garvey. But an atmosphere had been prepared for his arrival. After First World War, the Secretary of War had told black Americans that your position would not be changed by virtue of having been participated in that war, and to prove it, some were lynched in their uniform. We were mentally prepared to accept the message of Marcus Garvey over and above other African people because of the tragic uniqueness of our suffering. And it had nothing to do with one people being more alert than the other, or one being better than the other. Because the antecedents for his emergence was in motion 100 years before. Now, after the fragmenting of the movement, putting the movement back together again, reconsideration was given to Marcus Garvey during the Italian-Ethiopian War. For he had prophesied the war, and he, more than any other person writing in the Black Man magazine, criticized Haile Selassie as a turncoat in a Western part. Had no much to go back and read it. The Negro world is preserved in libraries. Every single copy of the Black Man's magazine has been published in a bound edition in any good library. Stop all the propaganda and read what he said. Read African fundamentalism. Read it just the way you say your prayers. Read it to your children. Now, let's look at the re-emergence of the Garvey concept and why 5 years after his death, he came alive again. At the Pan-African Congress, 1945 in Manchester, England, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Ezekwe, Johnstone Kenyatta, later Jomo Kenyatta, would plan for the future independence of African states. Those plans, at their admission, was based on the best of their understanding of Garvey's. And when African states became into being, most of the elite heads of African states used the Garvey example to bring a state into being, only to be betrayed by a Western-educated elite, more missionary-oriented than African-oriented. Now I wonder, how can you conclude something that has no conclusion? Because Marcus Garvey is still very much alive. And we have missed his message by assuming that his body is in Kings Park, that he is a Jamaican national hero, when they're not even teaching Garveyism in the school, although they keep promising they would. Now, let's look at this aftermath and his influence beyond 1945, 5 years after his death, that it was the underlying influence of Marcus Garvey that would help to set in motion the concept of independent states in Africa. In that first decade of that independent explosion, African nations were gravitating toward his teaching. And a sick nation that had come into being through participation of both Caribbeans and Black Americans, Liberia, had already betrayed their promise to him and became politically a stillborn child that it still is. This nation could have been the role model for what an African state could be, but it had failed. Haiti had failed because it failed to solve the color problem, and it failed to solve the problem between itself and France, and accepted the French Constitution. After the Italian-Ethiopian War, we began to reconsider the teachings of Marcus Garvey. And most of the young radicals of that day saw no contradiction in being Garveyites, pan-Africanists, African world nationalists, and socialists and communists all at the same time, because they did not see any contradiction. Later they would learn that everything that came from a European mind was meant to facilitate European control over the world. that includes communism, socialism, and an old religion that was 3,000 years old before Christ that they call Christianity. I didn't say leave it. I'm saying accept your own interpretation of it. Stop using carbon copies of someone else's concept of how to rule a state. Go back to your original copy. The coexistence of different people and different cultures, different African people, different religions, different cultures functioning side by side. If we're going to unify Africa, unify the whole of the African world, we're going to have to take his teaching seriously. We need to examine the works of Tony Martin that I consider to be very valuable, because Tony Martin is a scholar writing about Marcus Garvey, who is a Garveyite. I do not put aside or underrate the works of Professor Robert Hill, because he has gathered more documents on the Marcus Garvey movement than any scholar ever. Now, I might have some questions about his interpretation, his seemingly conservative approach, but I'm interested in the documents he gathered, because the documents he gathered will tell us a whole lot that he didn't say. All his appraisals are intelligently done, but borders on the conservative. And I don't know what conservative black people are trying to conserve except their miserable obscurity in their tragic color. To be honest to us, you've got to hurt somebody's feelings that has been dishonest to us. I'm saying that as we approach the end of the 20th century, let us consider the fact that between the Caribbean islands, South America, there are 300 million African people. There are millions of African people in Asia. 700 million in Africa. We number over 1 billion people on the face of the earth. If those billion people are to be brought together and trained in self-reliance, we need a serious reconsideration of the message of Marcus Garvey, because it is the cohesive method that we can use to put all of them together and make them function. As we restructure nations, we have to remember what has been taken away from us, and must remember what other nations had and still have that we do not have. Self-confidence and the image of God as they originally conceived him or her to be. We had no problem with the female God. That's another lecture, but the European got some hang-ups about females, and when we associate with him, adopt his idea, we adopt some of the same hang-ups. We have to throw all of this off and realize we produce a society where the woman was the center of the society and could become the ruler of the society with the cooperation of men without threatening a single man. The European is insecure with women, insecure with himself. I would like to end with his phrase, up, up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will, if I thought you believed it. You will not believe it so long as you live in slums, because if you believed it, you would say that in the name of Garveyism, we are too proud to live in slums. If you believed it, you would say, in the name of Marcus Garvey, I would practice a religion whose concept came out of Africa. And I will approach Christianity my way. What Marcus Garvey has left behind us is a blueprint that we can use to struggle against our oppressor and to bring independent nations into being and to keep them in focus. But we cannot do this imitating slave masters. We must use our own creative imagination. And symbolically, we have to go back to a fork in the road where we made the wrong turn. When we turned to someone else's concept of religion, we made the wrong turn. When we accepted someone that didn't look like us as our spiritual father, we showed disrespect to the black father in the home. We were taking the wrong turn. When we thought that we could take methodology from a slave master who took away our freedom to reestablish our freedom, we were taking the wrong turn. We got to get back home spiritually, politically, and economically. So therefore, we have to go back to that fork in the road and see which way those signboards are reading again. And if we read a signboard pointing that direction, they say Garvey, nationalism, pan-africanism, we're reading the signboards correctly again. If we see a sign that said African unity and the consolidation of all the African people of the world, each protecting each other, all the gradations created by rape, come home and work for our liberation, or go make peace with your white father. Could be one or the other. Come in the house and stay, or go out of the house and stay. If you want to leave, we can afford to lose you. If you want to stay, we're glad to have you. But your struggle is no different from the rest of our struggle. You had no control over the rape of your grandfather and grandmother. So we'll accept you the way you are if you're totally a part of our struggle. What I'm saying is that away from Marcus Garvey and looking away from the great pan-Africanists that came before him, somewhere we lost our way. And the reason for reading the signboards again, discovering unity again, discovering a concept of freedom that we developed through our mind, and a concept of ruling the state, spiritually and politically, that came from our mind, we'll be looking in the right direction. And at last, the message of Garvey would have found us wandering in the wilderness, but it is the message of Marcus Garvey that will put us back on the road and lead us home. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Brothers and sisters, you have heard the Master. Heed his words well. And now we come to that very pleasant part of the proceedings when we ask you to relax and enjoy supper with us. And we ask the service, which will start at the table, and then we will ask you by table numbers to come up for the second and other courses.